Okay, this is the Henry Cowell Redwood State Park. It's cool. We're in a redwood grove, and there is a walk here that is about 0.8 of a mile long that I intend to traverse. And this is a real treat. This is the first time we've had weather this time of year that is serviceable, that's reasonable. I've been stuck in the house, stuck in the studio, not been able to get out. And this is not a complaint, it's just a fact. I could not make videos out of doors because it was raining. It was terrible light conditions. The wind was out of control. And so I don't try to do the impossible. That's not reasonable. So we are here in the Henry Cowell State Park. You can hear a train whistle, and that train is a feature of this area. That is the Roaring Camp Railroad. It's a steam railroad that's used for visitors to enjoy a ride through the Redwoods. They have a station up in this area adjacent to this park. And then if you buy a ticket, you can take that train down to Santa Cruz to the boardwalk. It's quite a thing. It turns out that many years ago, when my wife was a teenager living on the East Coast, she came to San Francisco with her mom for a convention. And while they were there, they had some time. I think that was the trip. And so they came here to this area and went on that train, and it was in the summer. And her testimony about that trip was it was one of the coldest things that ever happened to her. Even though it's summer, it can be very, very cold in these redwoods. And people come ill-prepared and wind up freezing. There is a cut section of a log here behind me, and there are labels of the corresponding years related to events in the world. These trees are very old. In previous videos, I showed you what it's like in a... Oh, the train's coming right through here. I think we'll let that train pass. In a couple of my early videos, I took you all on a walk into a redwood grove. That was near our home, and that grove of redwoods is open to the public, and anyone can go there. In that grove near our home, it is not old growth, it is secondary growth or second growth forest, because this area was logged extensively starting at about 1850. This might be a good time to review California history very briefly. It's interesting. California was initially claimed by the Spanish, and the Spanish explorers were here hundreds of years ago. California became a Spanish colony in 1769. That colonial period under Spain lasted until Mexico gained its independence in 1821. So California, this area here, was a Spanish colony for 52 years. Then Mexico was the owner of this land. This was called Alta California, and it was owned by Mexico from 1821 until 1848. The war with Mexico, between the United States and Mexico, was resolved with a treaty, and in that treaty, the United States got this land. So this part of the country became a territory of the United States in 1848. But things were about to happen, because in 1849, the gold rush started, and you wound up with hundreds of thousands of people moving to California related to the gold rush. And The fortunes that were made were not just made by people finding gold, but people providing services for all these new arrived people, because they needed services, they needed places to stay, food to eat, clothes to wear, and so fortunes were made. It was only 2 years later that California became a state in 1850. Between then and now, 95% of the redwood trees were cut down. Only 5% of the original trees remain at this point. There are 3 old growth groves in this area that are preserved by the state. So this is an old growth forest. These trees were not logged, so they're much larger than the trees that are present in the redwood grove near our home. We've been here many times before. It's one of those places that you tend to bring people when they come here visiting from out of town. And I was just recalling that the last time I was here was when my daughter and her husband came to visit. And we had a very long, leisurely walk through these woods, enjoying a very long, delightful conversation. That was more than half a decade ago for sure. You know, I called this a redwood grove, but that's a little disingenuous. This is a redwood grove, but it also has a lot of other trees. There are some evergreens, there are some willows, some tan oaks. So there are a lot of different kinds of trees in here. This is a wild forest, not a cultivated, pure grove of one type of tree by any means, no. It's a wild forest. I'm looking at a tree that's big, but by redwood standards quite spindly and small, and it appears to be a tan oak. There are a lot of ferns here and a lot of mosses. There's an old stump of a redwood tree covered in moss. You can see it right in that area. That's a rotting, decaying stump of a redwood from many years ago, covered completely with a moss. This park is well managed. They've set up these rail fences to keep people on the path, so much of the park is wild. It's not being destroyed by visitors tramping around. Okay, so this tree here has been named the Giant. It's about 15 meters in circumference. And as we look up, it's about 80 meters tall, a little more than that. They estimate that this tree is about 1,400 years old. They date this tree back to the 7th century, although that estimate is plus or minus 200 years, so it could actually be even older than that. As we're walking around here, the light is, of course, very subdued, and you might get the impression watching this video that I'm here in the late afternoon, but this is not the case. It's about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun is high in the sky, but the light is very subdued because of these trees. This is a favorite place for classes to come, and I just left a very large peloton of students with teachers. What a great place for a class field trip. A few minutes ago, I said that this park is one of those places where we tend to bring people from out of town, and I suppose that's literally what I'm doing now, because the people watching these videos are on 5 continents, And so literally I'm bringing people from very much out of town to come visit this grove. One of the striking features of this grove is how quiet it is. The foliage, all this foliage, and the leaf litter, and even the bark of the trees are very capable of absorbing sound. So as I walk along here, the striking feature is how quiet it is. On a lot of the surfaces there are mosses, very simple plants. These mosses are their own little ecosystem in a miniature. They're like forests in miniature. And one of the things that you can find in those mosses is a miniature animal form called a tardigrade. And in future videos, I'm going to actually show you tardigrades because you need a microscope to see them, but that's in our production schedule. We have a lot of these mosses on trees, tree trunks, and surfaces near the house. And it's very easy to get a little bit of moss and rinse it with water and find tardigrades and see them in a microscope. So in a future video, I will break out the phase contrast microscope and we will be looking at tardigrades, part of the ecosystem in mosses. Here's a redwood with an interesting feature, and that is a giant couple of burls. It's an adaptive growth pattern that you see frequently as a response to stress or injury. It's part of the characteristics of redwoods. This is an old growth forest, but some of these trees have been cut. I did a little reading, and that tree stump, that cut stump of a tree, was not a redwood. That was a Douglas fir. I didn't try to do a deep dive on figuring out why they cut it. This grove was preserved by the state once it came under the control of the state, but it was privately held for a long time, and so this grove was actually preserved kind of by accident. This land and all these trees was owned by a fellow who owned a sawmill. So ostensibly, he was planning on cutting all these trees down and selling the lumber. That was the nature of the business he was in. But it never happened. And then as various owners died and the land got passed on to new owners, perhaps by accident, nobody cut these trees down. And then I think ownership was transferred to the city of Santa Cruz, and it's now a state park. So based on my reading, I think this old growth forest, these 40 acres of old growth redwoods, were preserved to some extent by accident. There was so much logging in the area that the old growth forests were cut down. Eventually, people started realizing the value of an old growth forest, and then the sensation of a need to preserve it, it became more prominent. Well, this was a 3/4 mile walk, and it was incredibly short by my standards. It was super easy. It's a level path. There are no obstacles or hazards. And it was just a very pleasant, easy walk in a beautiful old growth redwood forest. If you have an opportunity to come to Northern California, this is a fantastic place to visit. I'm going to have to come back here more often. This is a great place to come and gather your thoughts and spend some good time with yourself thinking about things. Well, we've come back to the parking lot. I hope you enjoyed this visit to the Henry Cowell Redwood State Park and the old growth grove. And if you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.